Earth's revenge was so savage the galaxy fell silent. Part 1. First contact, last mistake. The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. In the year 2247, they finally knew the answer. The universe was full of life, and most of it was old, powerful, and completely uninterested in the young species from Earth. Humanity had spread to 3 star systems by then. It was not much compared to the great empires of the galaxy, but humans were proud of what they had built. On a green world called Kepler 442b, 17 million people had made their home. They grew food in massive farms that stretched across entire continents. They raised families. They built schools and hospitals and parks where children played under an alien sun. It was humanity's largest colony, and the people there believed they were building a future among the stars. They were wrong. The Galactic Concordat was an alliance of 12 ancient species that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humans had existed. They watched humanity's expansion with the same interest a person might show an ant building a hill in their garden. Amusing, perhaps, but not important. Humans were young. They would learn their place eventually. The Vethkai were different. They were a reptilian species with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that held no warmth. Their empire had grown through conquest and fear. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who stood in their way. When they looked at humanity, they did not see a young species finding its feet. They saw prey. The attack came without warning on a bright morning in the colony's spring season. Sarah Chun was walking her daughter to school when the sky turned to fire. She had just enough time to push her child behind a wall before the first plasma bolt struck the street. The blast threw her through the air. When she opened her eyes, her daughter was gone. There was only ash where the girl had stood. Across the colony, the same scene repeated itself 17 million times. The Vethkai fleet had arrived in orbit just minutes before the bombardment began. There was no demand for surrender, no attempt at communication, no chance to flee. The reptilian warships simply opened fire on everything below. Cities vanished in pillars of flame. Farms became craters. The ocean itself boiled where the weapons struck. Commander Yuki Tanaka was aboard the colony's single defense station when the attack started. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen too much in her 60 years of service. She knew immediately that there was no hope of victory. Her station's weapons were designed to stop pirates and meteors, not a battle fleet. She ordered her crew to fight anyway. The station lasted 4 minutes. In that time, Tanaka managed to destroy 2 Vethkai landing craft and damage a destroyer. It was nothing against a fleet of hundreds, but it was something. As her station broke apart around her, she activated the emergency beacon and transmitted everything her sensors had recorded. Then the void took her. The Vethkai finished their work in 6 hours. When they were done, nothing lived on Kepler 442b. The beautiful green world had become a tomb of glass and ash. The reptilian commanders gathered footage of the destruction and broadcast it across every channel in the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see what happened to species that expanded into territory the Vethkai considered theirs. The broadcast reached Earth at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Within an hour, every human in the solar system had seen the images of burning cities and dead children. They saw the Vethkai commander, a massive creature with golden scales and a voice like grinding stone, explain that humanity had been taught a lesson in galactic reality. On Earth, in a small apartment in Shanghai, an old woman named Wei Lin Chun watched the broadcast alone. She had retired from the military 20 years ago. She had spent those years being a grandmother, teaching her grandchildren to fish and telling them stories about the stars. Her son had moved to Kepler 442b 5 years ago with his family. His wife had just sent Wei Lin a video of the children playing in their garden. That video was now the last record of their existence. Wei Lin watched the Vethkai commander speak about lessons and reality. She watched him display the ruins of the colony where her family had lived. She watched until the broadcast ended and the screen went dark. Then she stood up, walked to her closet, and pulled out her old uniform. It still fit. The galaxy expected humanity to react with fear. The elder races of the Concordat assumed the young species would come begging for protection. The Vethkai expected them to submit, to accept their place as prey animals in a universe ruled by predators. Some species had done exactly that throughout galactic history. They had seen the power of their attackers and given up hope. But humanity did something no one expected. Earth went silent. The transmissions stopped. The ships stopped leaving Sol System. The diplomatic channels went dead. For 3 months, no word came from humanity's homeworld. The Concordat sent messages asking if assistance was needed. There was no reply. The Vethkai sent demands for formal surrender. Silence. Other species, curious about the young race's fate, tried to make contact. Nothing. The galaxy began to assume that humanity had simply broken. It happened sometimes. A young species would suffer a trauma too great to survive, and they would turn inward, waiting to die. The Concordat debated whether to send an expedition to check on the humans. The Vethkai laughed and began planning their next conquest. Deep beneath the ice of Jupiter's moon Europa, far from any satellite or sensor that might detect activity, the truth was very different. In shipyards that no government had ever acknowledged, humanity was building. Every factory in 3 star systems had been converted to military production. Every scientist who had studied alien technology was working without sleep. Every resource humanity possessed flowed toward a single purpose. Admiral Wei Lin Chun, called back to service by a unanimous vote of Earth's government, stood before a holographic display of the growing fleet. She was not alone. Behind her stood the representatives of every human nation, every colony, every faction that had ever argued or fought with each other. For the first time in history, humanity was truly united. The Admiral's orders were simple. They did not speak of defense or negotiation or proportional response. They spoke of something else entirely. "We do not warn," Wei Lin said to her commanders. "We do not threaten. We do not negotiate. We build, we prepare, and when we are ready, we show the galaxy what happens when you murder our children." The room was silent. No one disagreed. Humanity had been silent for 3 months. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. Earth's revenge was so savage the galaxy fell silent. Part 2. The quiet before the shipyards beneath Europa's ice had never been meant for war. They were built a century ago as a secret project to construct colony ships, hidden from political arguments about funding and priorities. Now they served a different purpose. Now they built vengeance. Admiral Wei Lin Chun walked through the main construction bay every morning. She was 70 years old, and her body ached from the cold and the long hours, but she refused to rest. Sleep brought dreams of her grandchildren, and she could not afford dreams. She could only afford purpose. Around her, thousands of workers moved like parts of a great machine. Welders sent sparks flying into the darkness. Engineers argued over blueprints that changed daily as new discoveries were made. Soldiers trained in zero gravity, learning to fight in ways no human had ever fought before. The noise was constant, a heartbeat of hammers and engines and shouted orders. Dr. James Okonkwo was the head of the research division. He was a thin man from Nigeria who had spent his life studying physics. Before the attack, he had been working on a theory about faster-than-light travel. Now he worked on weapons. He did not sleep much either. "We have made a breakthrough," he told the admiral one evening, his eyes red from exhaustion. "The Vethkai use plasma weapons. Very powerful, but they have a weakness. The containment fields can be disrupted by a specific frequency of radiation. We can build bombs that will cause their weapons to explode inside their own ships." Wei Lin nodded slowly. "How long until we can produce these bombs?" 2 months. Maybe less if we pull resources from the SHIELD project. Do it. This was how it went day after day. Human scientists studied every piece of alien technology they could find. They took apart captured Vethkai weapons from old border skirmishes. They analyzed the recordings from Commander Tanaka's final battle. They learned and they improved, and they created things that had never existed before. The galaxy had always considered humans to be clever, but weak. They were good at science and art, but they had no great military tradition compared to the elder races. The Concordat assumed that humanity's technology was decades behind the established powers. They were wrong. Humans had simply never had a reason to focus their cleverness on destruction. Now they had a reason not far from Europa. In the comfortable halls of the Galactic Concordat, the elder races debated what to do about the silent humans. The Rixari, a species of silicon-based beings who had always been friendly to humanity, expressed concern. Their ambassador, a crystalline creature that spoke through vibrations, had visited Earth before the silence began. "There is something in their eyes," the Rixari ambassador reported to the council. "Something I have never seen in a young species. They are not broken. They are not afraid. They are angry in a way that goes beyond emotion. It is cold. It is patient. I recommend we send observers to ensure they do not do something that cannot be undone." The Concordat laughed. The Vethkai representative, a huge reptile named Krathver, dismissed the concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. "The humans are nothing," he declared. "They had one colony outside their home system. We destroyed it in hours. They have no fleet, no experience, no allies. In a year, they will send ambassadors begging to become a protectorate. In 10 years, they will be mining resources for us like good servants." The council agreed. Humanity was not a threat. The matter was closed. Back on Europa, Wei Lin received reports from human spies scattered across the galaxy. These were traders and diplomats who had been stranded outside Sol System when the silence began. They had orders to watch, to listen, and to wait. Their reports painted a picture of a galaxy that had forgotten about humanity entirely. The Vethkai were already planning their next conquest. A peaceful species of aquatic beings on the far side of their territory. The Concordat was discussing trade agreements and border disputes. No one spoke about Kepler 442b anymore. 17 million dead humans had become a footnote in galactic history. Wei Lin read these reports in her small quarters, surrounded by pictures of her family. Her son's smile, her daughter-in-law's kind eyes, her grandchildren playing in a garden that no longer existed. She read about how the galaxy had moved on, and she felt something inside her grow harder and colder. "Good," she whispered to herself. "Let them forget. Let them think we are nothing." 6 months after the attack, the first ship was completed. It was not beautiful. Human vessels had always been designed with some thought for appearance, for the grace of curves and the elegance of form. This ship had none of that. It was a block of metal and weapons, ugly and brutal and designed for one thing only. Wei Lin stood on the observation deck as the ship left the construction bay. It moved slowly at first, then faster, disappearing into the darkness of space. Beside her, Dr. Okonkwo watched with something like fear in his eyes. "We are building monsters," he said quietly. "Yes," Wei Lin agreed. "We are. Is it worth it? Becoming what we hate." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her granddaughter's laugh. She thought about the ashes of 17 million people. She thought about the Vethkai commander's speech about lessons and reality. They taught us that the galaxy respects only strength, she finally said. That mercy is weakness. That the strong do what they want and the weak suffer. If that is the galaxy's truth, then we will become the strongest. And then, she paused. Then we will decide if their truth is really true. Okonkwo did not answer. There was nothing to say. By the 9th month, the fleet numbered 100 ships. By the 12th month, it was 300. Each ship was armed with weapons that did not exist a year ago. Each crew was trained to a level of perfection that would have been impossible without the focus that only grief can provide. And still, humanity was silent. No transmissions left Sol System. No ships crossed into galactic space. The Concordats stopped sending messages. The Vethkai stopped thinking about the humans at all. On the anniversary of the Kepler massacre, Admiral Wei Lin Chun stood before her complete fleet. 400 ships, crewed by men and women who had lost everything and had nothing left but purpose. Behind her, the frozen face of Europa gleamed in Jupiter's light. Before her, the stars waited. Today, we remember, she said, her voice carrying across every ship through encrypted channels. Tomorrow we remind the galaxy. The fleet began to move, and the silence was about to end. Earth's revenge was so savage, the galaxy fell silent. Part 3. The Hammer Falls, the Vethkai homeworld, was called Vethaner, and it was a hot planet of red deserts and black mountains. 60 billion reptilian beings lived there, the heart of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their cities were built from the bones of conquered species. Their monuments celebrated victories over races that no longer existed. They believed themselves to be the greatest warriors in the universe. On the morning of the attack, a Vethkai named Scareth was watching the communication screens in his office. He was a low-level technician, responsible for monitoring the relay stations that connected the Empire. It was boring work. Nothing interesting ever happened. Then every screen in the room went white. Scareth jumped back, thinking there had been an error. But it was not an error. Words began to appear on every screen, scrolling slowly in the Vethkai language. Names. Human names. Sarah Chun, age 7. Marcus Tanaka, age 4. Elena Okonkwo, age 82. David Kim, age 31. Thousands of names. Millions of names. Each one followed by a single word that remembered across the entire Vethkai Empire. The same thing was happening. Every communication relay, every orbital station, every satellite, every screen on every planet received the same transmission. The names of 17 million dead humans scrolling endlessly, each one remembered. The Vethkai tried to shut it down. They could not. The transmission had been designed by the best human engineers to be unstoppable. It would continue for exactly 1 hour, and there was nothing anyone could do but watch in the Imperial Palace. High Commander Krathver was screaming orders at his officers. He had dismissed humanity as nothing. He had laughed at the warnings. Now human names were appearing on the screens of his throne room, and he felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. Find where this is coming from. He roared, "Destroy the source." His officers tried. Their sensors searched the skies around Vethaner, looking for the ship that must be broadcasting the signal. They found nothing. The transmissions seemed to come from everywhere at once. Like the universe itself was speaking. Then the hour ended, and the names stopped. For one moment, there was silence. Then the human fleet arrived. 400 ships appeared in the space around Vethaner simultaneously. They came out of fold space in perfect formation, surrounding the planet like a net of steel and fire. The Vethkai defense fleet the largest military force their empire had ever assembled, moved to intercept. 3,000 warships against 400. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Human weapons did not just damage the Vethkai ships. They erased them. Dr. Okonko's radiation bombs caused the reptilian plasma weapons to explode inside their own vessels. New missile systems, guided by artificial intelligence that thought faster than any living being, found the weak points in Vethkai armor and struck with perfect accuracy. Shields that had held against the weapons of elder races failed in seconds, against technologies that had not existed a year ago. Commander Jin Park was flying one of the new human fighters. He was 23 years old, and his parents had died on Kepler 442b. He had joined the fleet on the day he turned 18, and he had trained every day since then for this moment. Now he was diving through the wreckage of destroyed Vethkai ships, hunting for survivors. He found a Vethkai battleship trying to flee. Its engines were damaged, but it was still moving, still trying to escape. Jin locked his weapons on the vessel. For a moment, he hesitated. There were thousands of beings on that ship. They were running away. They were no longer a threat. Then he remembered his mother's face, and he pressed the trigger. The battleship died in fire, and Jin felt nothing at all. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out again and again. Human pilots who had never killed before destroyed ship after ship with cold efficiency. Human gunners who had grown up believing in mercy fired until their weapons overheated. Human commanders who had once debated the ethics of war ordered strikes that left no survivors. When the Vethkai defense fleet was destroyed, Admiral Weilin Chun broadcast her first message to the planet below. Her face appeared on every screen on Vethana, an old human woman with gray hair and eyes that held no warmth. "1 year ago, you attacked our colony," she said. "You killed 17 million of our people. You broadcast their deaths as a lesson in what you called galactic reality. You expected us to submit. You expected us to accept our place as prey." She paused, and her voice grew colder. "You were wrong." The ground invasion began minutes later. Human dropships fell through the atmosphere like burning stars. They landed in the cities, in the military bases, in the centers of Vethkai power. Soldiers in black armor poured out, carrying weapons that made the legendary Vethkai warriors look like children with toys. High Commander Krathvor watched from his palace as human troops advanced through the capital. His personal guard, the finest soldiers in the empire, fell in waves. He had always believed that the Vethkai were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Now he saw the truth. The Vethkai had been bullies, attacking the weak and avoiding the strong. They had never faced an enemy who had nothing left to lose. A human soldier entered the throne room. She was a small woman, no larger than a Vethkai child, but she moved with a purpose that made Krathvor step back. She removed her helmet, revealing a face marked by scars and grief. "I am Sergeant Maria Santos," she said. "My husband was a teacher on Kepler 442b. He was helping children evacuate when your plasma fire killed him. He died trying to save others. Your people died trying to save themselves." She raised her weapon. "Do you understand the difference?" Krathvor tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to beg. But there was nothing to say. He had laughed about the massacre. He had called humans prey. He had broadcast the deaths of 17 million people as entertainment. The shot echoed through the empty palace, and a high commander of the Vethkai Empire fell. Across the planet, similar scenes unfolded. The Vethkai leadership, the commanders who had ordered the attack, the officials who had celebrated it, all of them faced judgment. Not from courts or laws, but from humans who had come to collect the debt. By sunset on Vethana, the battle was over. The Vethkai military was destroyed. Their government had fallen. Their empire, 10,000 years of conquest and cruelty, had ended in a single day. Admiral Wei Lin Chun stood in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, looking out over a city of smoke and silence. Her officers waited for orders. The galaxy waited to see what humanity would do next. The old woman closed her eyes and thought of her grandchildren. "Begin Phase 2, she said. The war was far from over. Earth's revenge was so savage the galaxy fell silent. Part 4. A war without mercy. The Vethkai had ruled dozens of worlds before humanity came. They had conquered species and turned them into slaves. They had built their empire on the backs of beings who had no choice but to serve. For thousands of years, these slaves had lived in fear and despair, believing that no one would ever challenge their masters. Now humanity was on their worlds. And everything changed. Admiral Wei Lin Chen did not want the Vethkai colonies for herself. She did not want their resources or their territory. She wanted something much more personal. She wanted the Vethkai to understand what it felt like to lose everything. The strategy was simple. Human ships would arrive at a Vethkai colony. They would destroy the military forces there. Then they would land and find the slave populations that served the reptilian masters. They would give these slaves weapons, training, and a choice. "You can stay as you are," the human soldiers would say. "Or you can fight for your freedom. We will help you either way." Most chose to fight. On the water world of Kethmer, a species called the Delori had served the Vethkai for 300 years. They were gentle beings with blue skin and large eyes, designed by evolution for peace, not war. The Vethkai had found them easy to conquer and easier to keep. Captain Thomas Reed landed on Kethmer with a company of Marines. He was a large man from Australia, quiet and patient, who had lost his sister in the Kepler massacre. He found the Delori living in underwater cages, forced to harvest minerals from the ocean floor for their masters. Thomas opened the cages himself. A Delori elder swam out slowly, afraid that this was some trick. He looked at the human soldier with eyes that had seen too much cruelty to believe in kindness. "Why are you here?" the elder asked. "The Vethkai killed our children," Thomas said simply. "We are going to destroy them. You can help us, or you can hide. We will not force you." The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a question that would echo across the galaxy. "And when the Vethkai are gone, will you become our new masters?" Thomas shook his head. "We are not looking for slaves. We are looking for allies. When this war is over, your world will be yours. We will leave, and you will be free." The elder studied the human's face, searching for the lie. He did not find one. "Then we will fight," he said. Similar scenes happened on world after world. Species that had suffered under Vethkai rule for centuries suddenly found themselves with weapons and teachers and hope. Some were natural warriors who had been broken by conquest. Some were peaceful beings who had to learn violence from scratch. All of them had reasons to hate the Vethkai, and all of them were willing to die for freedom. The galaxy watched with growing horror. In the halls of the Concordat, the elder races debated what to do. Some wanted to intervene, to stop the bloodshed before it spread further. Others argued that the Vethkai had brought this upon themselves. A few quietly hoped that humanity and the Vethkai would destroy each other, leaving the galaxy free of both. The Rixari ambassador spoke last. "This is not a war," he said, his crystalline body vibrating with emotion. "This is a reckoning. The Vethkai built their empire on cruelty. Now that cruelty is returning to them. Humanity is not conquering worlds. They are setting them free. And what happens when all the worlds are free?" Another ambassador asked. "Will the humans stop? Or will they turn their anger toward us?" No one had an answer. On Vethner, the former capital of the empire, human soldiers fought building to building against the last defenders. They could have bombed the cities from orbit. They could have turned the entire planet to glass. as the Vethkai had done to Kepler 442b. They chose not to. Sergeant Maria Santos, the woman who had killed High Commander Krathfor, led her squad through the burning streets. She was tired. She had been fighting for 6 months without rest. She had killed more Vethkai than she could count, and each death felt like nothing at all. One of her soldiers, a young man named David Park, who was Jin's younger brother, stopped beside a collapsed building. Something was moving in the rubble. Actually in the rubble. "Sergeant," he called. "There's someone alive." Maria moved to look. Under the broken stones, a small Vethkai was trapped. It was a child, barely old enough to walk, its scales still soft and its eyes wide with terror. It looked at the human soldiers and made a sound like crying. Maria stared at the child for a long moment. Her hands tightened on her weapon. This was the enemy. This was the species that had murdered 17 million of her people. This creature would grow up to be like the rest of them, cruel and violent and hungry for conquest. She could kill it so easily. Instead, she put away her weapon and began moving the rubble. David watched in confusion. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" "Saving a child," Maria said without stopping. "Help me." Together, they freed the young Vethkai from the ruins. It was injured but alive. Maria carried it to a medical station and handed it to a doctor. "Take care of this one," she said. The doctor, a tired man who had seen too much death, looked at her strangely. "Why?" Maria was quiet for a moment. She thought about her husband, who had died trying to save children. She thought about the war she had fought and the things she had done. She thought about what she was becoming. "Because we are better than them," she said finally. "At least, we are supposed to be." The story spread quickly through the human forces. Some soldiers called Maria weak. Others called her wise. But more and more, humans began to make the same choice. They fought without mercy against those who carried weapons. They killed every soldier who refused to surrender. But they protected the young, the sick, the helpless. It was not forgiveness. It was not peace. But it was something. The war continued for 18 months. Colony after colony fell. The Vethkai sued for peace 17 times, and each offer was rejected. Their allies abandoned them. Their slaves rose against them. Their empire crumbled into dust. Finally, in desperation, the remaining Vethkai leadership made a terrible decision. They had stolen a weapon from the Concordat long ago, a device that could destroy entire planets. They had kept it hidden for emergencies. Now they activated it. Their target was Earth. The strike force launched in secret, carrying the planet killer toward humanity's homeworld. They believed they could still win. They believed that even if they fell, they could take humanity with them. They were wrong. Human intelligence had known about the weapon for months. Spies had infiltrated every level of Vethkai command. The strike force was intercepted before it left Vethkai space, and the planet killer was captured intact. Admiral Wei-Lin Chun looked at the weapon that could have destroyed her world. She thought about using it. She could end the war right now, turn Vethner into nothing, wipe the Vethkai from existence. No one would blame her. No one would stop her. She thought about her grandchildren. She thought about what they would have wanted. Then she ordered the weapon destroyed. "We will not become them," she said to her officers. "We came here to end a threat, not to commit genocide. The war is over." And it was. Earth's revenge was so savage, the galaxy fell silent. Part 5. The silence the Vethkai Imperium was dissolved on a gray morning, 2 years after the war began. There was no grand ceremony, no celebration, no parade of victory. Admiral Wei-Lin Chun simply transmitted a message to the galaxy announcing that the Empire no longer existed. The terms were harsh but not cruel. The Vethkai military was completely destroyed. Their weapons were melted down. Their warships were taken apart for scrap. Their government was restructured under concordant supervision, with human observers on every former Vethkai world to ensure the terms were followed. But humanity did not kill the Vethkai people. They did not enslave them or scatter them across the stars. They simply watched, silent sentinels standing guard over a fallen empire, making sure that what had happened to Kepler 442b could never happen again. The cost of the war was beyond calculation. Humanity had lost another 8 million soldiers and civilians. 3 of their colony worlds had been attacked in the final desperate months of the conflict. Their economy was in ruins. Their society was scarred in ways that would take generations to heal. But they had won. The Galactic Concordat called an emergency session 1 month after the war ended. It was the first such meeting in 3,000 years, reserved only for events that could change the fate of the galaxy. 12 elder races, beings who had watched empires rise and fall for longer than humans had existed, gathered in a chamber of crystal and light. They waited in uncomfortable silence for the human ambassador to arrive. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka walked into the chamber alone. She was a tall woman with silver hair and a face that showed no emotion. She had been a diplomat before the war, trained in the art of careful words and gentle compromise. The war had changed her, as it had changed all humans. The representatives of 12 species watched as she took her place at the speaking platform. Some looked at her with fear, others with respect. A few with something like shame.yuk. I stood in silence for a long moment, looking at each delegation in turn. Then she spoke. 2 years ago, you watched 17 million of my people die. You saw the Vethkai broadcast our suffering as entertainment. You heard them call us prey, call us nothing, call us a lesson in galactic reality. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. And you did nothing. The chamber was silent. No one tried to argue. We came to you for help, Yuki continued. We asked for protection, for justice, for anything. You told us that the galaxy does not work that way. You told us that the strong do what they want and the weak suffer. You told us to accept our place. She paused. So we did. The words hung in the air like a blade. We accepted that we were weak. We accepted that no one would help us. We accepted that if we wanted justice, we would have to take it ourselves. And we did. Yuki's eyes swept across the chamber. We destroyed the greatest military power in this region of the galaxy in 18 months. We freed every species they had enslaved. We captured a weapon that could destroy worlds, and we chose not to use it. The silence deepened. Now you know what humanity is, Yuki said. We are not prey. We are not children to be taught lessons. We are a species that remembers. We remember kindness, and we remember cruelty. We remember friends, and we remember enemies. She took a slow breath. We do not want to be your enemies. We would rather be your partners. We would rather build and explore and learn together. But understand this. Her voice hardened. Never again. If any species touches our people, our worlds, our children, there will be no warnings. There will be no negotiations. There will be no proportional response. There will only be consequences. The chamber remained frozen. We came here today to ask for membership in this Concordat. Not because we need your protection, but because we believe the galaxy can be better than it has been. We believe that species can work together instead of preying on each other. We believe that strength should be used to protect, not to destroy. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. But if you refuse us, if you decide that humanity is too dangerous, too unpredictable, too human to be trusted, we will understand. We will return to our worlds and continue alone. And you will spend the rest of your existence wondering when we will decide that you are a threat. Yuki stepped back from the platform. Her message was complete. The eldest member of the Concordat rose slowly. He was a being called the First Voice, a creature of light and thought who had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history. He had seen species born and die. He had seen empires that made the Vethkai look like children. He'd seen cruelty and kindness in measures beyond counting. Now he looked at the human ambassador, and for the first time in millennia, he felt something like hope. Humanity is recognized as a full member of the Galactic Concordat, he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber, with all rights and privileges thereof. Furthermore, let it be recorded in the permanent archives of this body, humanity is not to be tested. The motion passed unanimously. In the years that followed, humanity rebuilt. They established new colonies on worlds given to them by grateful species they had freed. They formed alliances with the Delori and dozens of other races who had suffered under Vethkai rule. They built schools and hospitals and research stations where humans and aliens worked together. The scars remained. There were monuments on every human world listing the names of the 17 million who had died on Kepler-4 42b. There were holidays of remembrance and songs of grief that would be sung for generations. There were soldiers who could not sleep and children who grew up knowing their parents only from pictures. But there was also hope. Admiral Weilin Chen retired 3 years after the war ended. She returned to her apartment in Shanghai, where pictures of her family still hung on the walls. She spent her final years teaching at a military academy, training the next generation of officers. She never spoke about the war in public. She never wrote a memoir or gave interviews. When she died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, the entire galaxy paused to remember her. Ships flew with their lights dimmed. Flags were lowered on 100 worlds. Species who had never met her honored her name. On Kepler-4 42b, where her son and grandchildren had died, a small group of humans landed for the first time since the massacre. They planted trees in the ash. They built a garden where the children used to play. They made something beautiful in a place of death. And across the galaxy, in whispered conversations and quiet moments, species who had known only oppression began to use a new word. It meant different things in different languages. In some, it meant protector. In others, avenger. In a few, it simply meant hope. The word was human. The Vethkai had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about galactic reality. They had wanted to show that the universe was cruel and only the strong survived. They had succeeded, in a way. Humanity had learned. They had become strong, but they had also learned something else. They had learned that strength without purpose is just cruelty. That power without mercy is just tyranny. That the galaxy could be better than it was if someone was willing to fight for it. The Vethkai had wanted silence from humanity. They got it. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of respect. And in that silence, humanity finally found its place among the stars.